All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. It's very exciting for us here at Avas Torah to be hosting the Siyum Maseches Taanis together with all DAF. For the guests who are here, my name is Chaim Poupko. I have the privilege of serving as the rabbi here at Avas Torah, and I just wanted to welcome everyone, to thank Rabbi Moshe Schwed and the all DAF team and OU for putting together this beautiful event. And a very special thank you to all those who are participating, as well as to Josh Goldberg for really being the catalyst for bringing this all together, for doing so much. He came to our community not long ago and has been just a driving force in wanting to help out and assist and push and bring new ideas. And so, Josh, I wanted to just give you a very special thank you for making this happen. And so I just want to turn the program over to Rabbi Schwed, who is going to take us through the rest of the program this morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Rabbi Poupko, for the introduction. Thank you for hosting. On behalf of OU leadership, Mr. Moshe Bain, President, Rabbi Moshe Hauer, Executive Vice President, I would like to thank everybody for coming this morning, for all those that are watching on camera across the globe. I have to thank, as Rabbi Poupko mentioned, Josh Goldberg for putting this all together, someone who's been dedicating and sponsoring all this Siyum. Usually I mention a few words about his brother, who he's dedicated this Siyum in the past and this Siyum, but he'll be speaking in a few minutes, so he'll give over the personal feelings. The All DAF app is dedicated in memory of Mayor Ben Chaim Waknin, who was a member of the Casablanca community, who passed away during COVID-19. He was somebody, he was a special person, a family person who was involved in the community. Yehei Zichroi Baruch. I would like to thank all the Rabbanim in the community who've come to take part in this community event. It means a lot to us. We've hosted different types of siyumim, but when the community gets together and all the shuls come together, it really shows the importance they give to Limud Torah, Daf Yomi, and Limud Torah in general. There are a few rabbis who are going to be on the program speaking, so I'll leave the Divrei Torah for them. Just one short thing I'd like to mention. Today is Ches Teves, and the last siman in Shulchan Aruch and the Torah, Siman Tav Kuf Pei, it says, it's brought down from the Bahag, and it's really, I believe the source is in Megillas Taanis, that on Ches Teves, Talmai HaMelech translated the Torah to Yavanis, to Greek, and it says that Yarda Choshach La'olam, that there was darkness that descended upon the world. So I think today, Ches Teves, we take the time to come together to celebrate the Ar Torah, the light of Torah, is something which is special and meaningful by the Borei Olam. I'd like to thank Rabbi Lebowitz for coming in special and Old Daf Magid Shir, coming in from Woodmere. He's actually making a wedding today, so it's extra special that he took the time to come and join us. Mazel Tov. I'd like to call upon Rabbi Genack. Rabbi Genack actually has a series on the Old Daf app almost daily. He says over short pieces from his Rebbe, his Rosh Yeshiva, Yashaber Soloveitchik, can be found in the supplemental clips, and definitely worth checking out. Short pieces from his Rebbe every single day. Rabbi Genack and I go back quite a while. I believe Rabbi Genack actually had a bracha by my chuppah. My father-in-law works together with Rabbi Genack at the OU kosher, and I'd like to call upon Rabbi Genack to say a few words.
I'm wearing this white tie, not only because it's a Siyum, but after this I apologize, I have to run out to give a shiur in YU, and then I have to give another shiur in Queens, and then I'm going to Rabbi Leibowitz Chasna, so I'm not going to have time to, Mazel Tov, again. This is, of course, finishing any Masechta is a great simcha, and I just wanted to share a few thoughts with you about the Masechta as it ends, and some of the things I'm going to say, I heard from the Rav when he made a Siyum. This goes back, I think it was 1977, a few years, on Maseches Taanis. The Rav learned it in Moria. But the Mishnah and the Gemara elaborates, tells us, Lo hayu yomin tovim liyisol ki yom kippurim v'chamisha asar b'av. The two happiest days in the Jewish calendar are Yom Kippur and Chamisha asar b'av. So Yom Kippur, the Gemara says, is because it's Yom Slicha Mechila, that we understand. It's a day of forgiveness. Kadosh Baruch Hu forgives our iniquities. And it's also, the Gemara says, Yom Shenitno Luchos Shnios. The second Luchos were given on Yom Kippur. And that's indeed one of the days why Yom Kippur is a day of Slicha Mechila, because God forgave Klal Yisrael on that day for the sin of the Egel. So one thing that the Rav spoke about at that Siyum, and I'd like to elaborate and link it to Tu B'Av, was something from his namesake, his great-grandfather, the Beis HaLevi. The Beis HaLevi says that there was a difference. Time is of essence, so I'm going to truncate this a little bit. But there was a difference between Luchos Rishonos and Luchos Shnios. That with Luchos Rishonos, the Torah Shebiksav was given. But with Luchos Shnios, with the second Luchos, the Torah Shebe'al Peh was given. And Luchos Rishonos, the Beis HaLevi says, those halachos are some engraved in some way on the Luchos, but Luchos Shnios, the Torah Shebe'al Peh was given. And the Rav said there's a difference, playing on the Beis HaLevi, between Luchos Rishonos and Luchos Shnios. Luchos Shnios, when somebody studied the Torah Shebiksav, so it sanctifies him as well. But he is what we would call tashmishik. It's a derivative kedusha, tashmishik kedusha. For example, the tefillin are gufei kedusha. If you put it in a tefillin zekel in the tefillin bag, they have a derivative but less significant kedusha. So when somebody studies Torah Shebiksav, he has that derivative kedusha. He's tashmishik kedusha. But if a person studies Torah Shebe'al Peh, the Beis HaLevi says, what is that written on? That's written on the person himself. And the Beis HaLevi quotes the pasuk of Kosfeim Aluach Libecha. And therefore, he becomes Gufei Kedusha. And that's why it could be that with Luchos Shnios, afterwards, since the Klal Yisrael, when they studied Torah, it became part and parcel of their personality, both nationally and individually. And therefore, even though they sinned grievously afterwards, the Klal Yisrael, there was never a threat to eradicate the Jewish people because they became Gufei Kedusha. And the Rav said that quoting the Gemara Soita, the Gemara says that when Moshe Rabbeinu died, so Bas Kol came out, and that could be heard throughout the Machne Yisrael, in everything. Bas Kol came out, Meis Moshe Rabbeinu, Safa Rabba de Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu died, the great sofer, the great scribe of the Jewish people. And the Rav said, what does this Bas Kol mean? The Bas Kol doesn't only mean to say that Moshe Rabbeinu, as we know, wrote many different Sifrei Torah for each Shevet, the Sefer Zorah. That's not what it's called the Safa Rabba. It's not only what he wrote on parchment, it's what he wrote on the soul of the Jewish people. And that's what we're celebrating, the Torah Shebe'al Peh. But there's another dimension, and that's what we know that the Mishnah says the two happiest days are also Tesvav B'Av. Now, Tesvav B'Av, as the Gemara describes it at the end of Taanis, was a kind of ancient Sadie Hawkins day when everybody looked for a shidduch. And the Gemara asks, what was the special joy of Tesvav B'Av? So the special joy of Tesvav B'Av was, the Gemara has a whole list of things. But the first thing it lists was that Hutru Shvotim Lavo B'Zeh B'Zeh. Before the Chalukas Haaretz, before the division of the land, the Shvotim weren't allowed to intermarry because it was necessary for the Chalukah. On Tesvav B'Av, sanction was given to intermarry, Shvotim. And then also it says that when they made a Cherem and Shevet Binyamin not to marry them because the story Pilogish, that also was rescinded on that day. So what you see about Tesvav, the special joy, I think, is that it also represents the unity of the Jewish people, bringing them together. And the faith we have in the future of the Jewish people, that was represented by The Gemara tells us that the Meisei Beta, the martyrs of Beta who were slaughtered in the Gemara says in Gittin, in hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed. The Rav's description of it in the Shir, he said it was almost like a mini Holocaust. Actually, during the Churban Abayis and the subsequent Bar Kokhba rebellion, historians estimate that about a third of the Jewish people were killed. There were approximately 3 million Jews, and approximately 1 million were killed. So it really is the equivalent of the Holocaust. And yet they saw that the Meisei Beta, the martyrs, that the bodies didn't decompose and rot. It was a simmer that even in the worst of times, the bris, the covenant, was not shattered. And that's I think, what these two themes represent. And Rameir Shapira, when he started the Daf Yomi, one of his underlying themes, one of his primary, was not only for people to learn. His idea was that everybody is learning the same thing. I don't think he could have imagined that it spread as universally. Of course, this was before Zoom and other technologies. But, that it could have spread as he thought. He was an extraordinary visionary. He died very young. But the idea was, he said, if one person goes from one city to another, from one shtetl to another shtetl, if he goes to a shir, there's a continuity. And his idea was also, this is the unity of the Jewish people. And that which binds us together ultimately is this, our commitment to the Torah Shebial Peh, which is inscribed in all of our hearts. And that's what we're celebrating today at this Siyum. Mazel Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi Genack. Before I introduce Rabbi Lebowitz, I would like to give a big thank you to Ben Blumenthal for tirelessly working to pull this all together with all the different shuls in the community. Thank you, Ben. We read yesterday in Parshas Vayigash, Al Tigrizu Baderech, and Rashi brings Chazal, actually in Maseches Taanis Daf Yud, that Yosef was telling the brothers, don't get caught up in deep learning in Divrei Torah on the way back to our father Yaakov Avinu. And Rashi in Taanis says, Tiso, which means don't get lost, don't get caught up in learning, which may cause you to take the wrong road, and it's going to take you longer to get back to our father Yaakov and give him the good news that I'm still alive. However, the Kli Yakar says Tiso is not talking about them getting lost and getting stuck on the road. It means Tiso, don't get caught up in learning Torah, and you're going to get involved in a Riska D'Oraisa, arguing with each other, and may cause kas, you may get upset, and it might cause you not to have the proper focus to be able to come to the proper maskana of what's needed for learning Torah. Now, Rabbi Lebowitz gives many types of shiurim. Besides his old daf shir, he gives shiurim, halacha shiurim. Perhaps, maybe we could suggest he gives a shir if listening to all daf in the car. Is that considered al tigruzu baderech, the Ian shiurim, the Vikiya shiurim? But one thing Rabbi Lebowitz is always daitay slula. He's always calm, always ready to say a shir. As we know, tonight is his son's wedding, and he's on his way to say a smicha shir in YU. That's how we're able to get him to come here across the bridge. So thank you, Rabbi Lebowitz, Mazel Tov, and it's our pleasure to hear a few words.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Schwed, and thank you, Rabbi Poupko, for hosting, and Bereshus, all of the Rabbanim Chashuvim. Thank you all for coming to this beautiful celebration of Torah this morning. I wanted to share with you a phone call that I got last week from someone who learns the Daf Yomi, learns it very religiously since the beginning of Maseches Brachos, and he was having a certain struggle with Maseches Taanis. A very sweet person, a very edel person, a very respectful person, and he said that some of these Agadita Gemaras, some of these Gemaras that tell these stories, it's not just that we feel that we don't understand these stories, it's that some of them are quite troubling. I don't know, for those who've, many of us here are doing the Daf, so we may recall a story of a holy Amora who had a daughter who was quite beautiful. We're not going to go through the whole story right now, but stories that are very, very troubling. And how do we relate to stories of Agadita? So I hate to hijack the program when we're supposed to do uplifting things. I want to talk a little bit about Agadita. Is that okay? Just to talk about a little bit about how we learn Agadata Gemara and what Agadata Gemara really is, especially since there's much more of it coming in Maseches Megillah. So and in Chagig we have a lot of Agadata to think about. So Agadata makes up a big chunk of Shas. Rav Aaron Feldman Shlita, the Rosh Yeshiva in Yisrael, estimates that it's about a 90-10 split. 90% of Shas is halacha, 10% Agadata. Mori Rabbi Rav Shachter Shlita estimates a 6-to-1 ratio. That seems a little more accurate, but whatever it is, it's mostly halacha, Talmud Bavli, and there's a good a miura matzui of Agadata. Halacha is certainly a much easier limud in the sense that there are precise definitions, and Agadata deals with concepts. Someone once described there are two types of personalities. There's what we call a word personality and an Excel personality. In Excel, everything has to fit into a box. In Word, it's free-flowing. There's no limit to the amount that and you can go in any direction. So Agadata is the word personality. Halacha is the Excel personality, that everything has to fit into categories and into boxes. But Agadata is also diverse. It includes stories of tzaddikim, business, health, general life advice, what to eat, when to eat, what kind of business to go into, depending on where you live. It includes theology. It includes obscure comments and stories. And Agadata and Halacha are almost a competition. They're competing forces with each other. They complement each other, but they also compete with each other. The Gemara Maseches Baba Kama Daf Samach tells us that two students were arguing whether the Rebbe should teach Halacha or Agada on a given day. And the Rebbe said, I'll give you a mashal. It's like a husband who has two wives, one older and one younger, and each one wanted to appear wanted to give the impression that her husband was an appropriate match for her. So the older wife was plucking all of the black hairs out of his head so he could look like he had gray hair and he was an appropriate match for her. And the younger one was plucking all of the white hairs out of his head so that he could give the impression that he should look younger. In fact, when I was getting a haircut for my son's chasana on Tuesday, the barber said, "Oh, I see some gray. Let me pluck that." I said, "No, I'm the father of a chasana. I'm allowed to be older. It's okay. That's fine." I wasn't sure it's a shaila whether a man is allowed to pluck black hairs. Can I let the white hairs? Can I let the barber do that? So anyway, but you see, the Gemara is clearly painting a picture of some sort of competition between the two, that the two are not the same. The Gemara in Sota and Daf Mem tells us that Rabbi Avo taught Agadata, and he had many more Talmidim than Rabbi Chia bar Abba, who taught Halacha. And he comforted Rabbi Chia bar Abba, and he told him, the 99-cent store has many more customers than Tiffany's. There's a reason for that, but it's not because the 99-cent store is selling higher quality jewelry than Tiffany's, which gives you the impression that Halacha is more valuable than Agadata. But the Gemara says he wasn't comforted, which maybe gives you the impression that maybe it's not really more valuable, and that was just something that he was trying to comfort him with. So I want to discuss a little bit about how important it is to have respect for every single word of Chazal, and maybe to describe a little bit why it is that Chazal would speak in such an unusual way when telling us these fantastic and odd stories and many other things as well. So the reliability of Gemara is something that we cannot question. There's a beautiful sefer that just came out by the name of Torascha Sha'ashuai, where he says that there's a Kabbalah from the brother of the Gra. He quotes a sefer Sheves Achim that quotes a Kabbalah from the brother of the Vilna Gaon. The Ravina v'Rav Ashi kishagomra Talmud, that when Ravina and Rav Ashi completed the Talmud, Sholchu l'Mesifta d'Rekia sheyaskimu misham. When you finish writing a sefer, one of the things you have to do is get a haskama. So you look for rabbis who maybe will write a nice letter that will say, usually, I didn't read the sefer, guy who wrote it's a nice guy, or at least seems to be, and here's my letterhead so that someone flipping through can see that my name is on it. So but they wanted a haskama from the Mesifta d'Rekia. They wanted a haskama from Shemayim. So they Shazei Yeh Torah Shebal Peh, not just a haskama, but that this should be the definition of Torah Shebal Peh. They wrote the book that's going to be Torah Shebal Peh. V'chasmu al zeh dalid malachim, and 4 angels signed on it: Gavriel, Michael, Raphael, Uriel, Rashi Tevos, Gemara. And in fact, we refer to Talmud Bavli most often not as Talmud Bavli, but as Gemara. The Sefer Chaim of the brother of the Maharal writes that these 4 malachim protect a Gemara learner. V'chein Torah Shebal Peh hi Magina al Yisrael. The Torah Shebal Peh protects the Jewish people. V'chein Nikreis Gemara, Shu Rashi Tevos Shel Gavriel, Michael, Raphael, Uriel. Lomar, to tell me, Kia osek begemara chonem malach Hashem savivlo lahatzilo, that he has malachei Hashem, someone who learns Gemara has malachei Hashem surrounding them. Miyamino Michael, on his right is Michael, umismolu Gavriel, on his left is Gavriel, milefanav Uriel, in front of him is Uriel, umeachorav Raphael, and behind him is Raphael, va'al rosho shchinas kel, and above him resides the Shechina. The Munkacher Rebbe in the Sefer Divrei Torah, in Madura Kama Os Yutes, says that it's makubal from the Bnei Yissaschar that a person should learn Gemara before davening each morning, and through that the tefillah will be elevated. And he says, because when one learns Gemara, the malachim are around him already, Michal, Gavriel, Raphael, Uriel, and therefore they're ready to carry his tefillos up to Shemayim. The Rambam Nakdama to the Parish of Mishnayos writes that ukeshemesu kol hachacham aleim hashalom ha'achron me'em Ravina v'Ravashi va'Talmud kvar nigmar, that with the passing of Ravina and Ravashi, the Talmud was completed. Kol asher kam achrav ha'isa tachlis kavanasav v'chol ma'odo lahavin dvarim shekasvu bilvad. Anything that happened afterwards was just to try to understand what was said earlier. Va'alavein lahosif umimenu ein lagroa. We don't add to the Talmud, we don't subtract to the Talmud. We come across a disturbing story, we cannot say, oh, it's just a story, it doesn't really matter. Don't let it bother you, don't let it be something that you focus on. It's probably just something silly because people were thinking in an ancient way in ancient times. No, every word of Gemara has to be taken very seriously. And if we don't understand it, we have the humility to say that, wait a second, maybe I'm not really getting the full depth of what Chazal are trying to convey. In fact, the Nod Yehuda in his drashos, in the Drushay Atzlach, goes so far as to say that Kol Masha Anu Musharim Mipi Gemara Tzarich Lios Shava Etzleinu Kamo Davar HaKosav BaAseres HaDibros. That if something appears in the Gemara, it's like the Aseres HaDibros to us. It should be as authoritative as the Aseres HaDibros. So the Rambam in Hakdama to Perek Chelik says, how do you learn Agadita? Perek Chelik is a whole parak about Agadita. It's 20 blot in a row about of Agadita Gemara. I remember when Moreno of Shechter Shlita used to say a weekly shir in Brooklyn. I didn't attend this year, but I would get the recordings. He used to say a weekly shir in Brooklyn on Gemara, and they were learning Maseches Sanhedrin. So they got to Daf Tzadi, they got to Peites Tzadi, wherever Perek Chelik starts, and he said, okay, so what Masechta are we doing next? And the whole Chaver said, we put in all this time waiting for years for you to get to the Agadita Gemara, and are you just going to jump ship and you're going to go and, what do you mean, what Masechta are we doing next? He said, well, I never heard of Siyum from Rav Soloveitchik on Perek Chelik, so how can I say Shir? Which itself is an interesting comment. So they convinced him to say Shirim on Perek Chelik as well. So that's where you have a lot of discussion about Agadita. And the Rambam says that there are three groups of people in their approaches to Agadita. There are people who are unintelligent people, who are not sophisticated in their thinking. And they understand Agadita on the simplest level, and because they're not sophisticated, they don't see any depth. And the Rambam writes, the members of this group are ignorant, and you can only regret their ignorance. Their very effort to honor and exalt the sages using their own meager understanding actually humiliates them. Meaning what they're saying is, Chazal are so smart because Chazal are telling us, and then they'll just tell you what it says in the Pshutan Shel Devarim, in the simple reading. And he's saying that's not an honor to the sages. Chazal weren't telling you what it sounds like it's saying in Agadita. You have to plumb the depths of Agadita. They're dishonoring the sages by saying that this is what Chazal were telling us. Chazal are just telling us pithy sayings. That's not what Chazal were here for. So it's a disrespect of the Chachamim. And then the Rambam says there's a second group, and there are those that think Chazal were literal, but they're cynical, and they hold Chazal to be fools. Meaning the first group says Chazal were literal, and it's so wise, and if we don't understand it, we're fools, but everything that they're saying on the simplest level is so wise. The Rambam says that's wrong, but worse than that is someone who looks at what Chazal are saying, also understands it on the simplest level, and say, Chazal were a bunch of fools. How could they think like this? That's also terrible. That's even worse. They hold themselves to be philosophers, says the Rambam. They have no understanding of philosophy. The Rambam was a man who knew something about philosophy. And then the Rambam says there's one tiny group of people, and he says it's somewhat cynically, the group is so small, I don't know if you can call it a group. Meaning it could be that the group is a group of one, and his name is Rav Moshe ben Maimon. There are people who recognize the greatness of Chazal and understood that Chazal speak with riddles and parables, which is how truly great thinkers often express themselves. So Chazal didn't mean it on the literal level when they tell us Agadata. But in order to learn Agadata, we have to understand what exactly it is that they were trying to do. The Rambam would constantly refer to throughout his Svarim the Sefer on Agadata that he's going to write. Sadly, he never did write it, so we don't have the Rambam Sefer on Agadata. It would have been wonderful if he did. But Hashgacha had it that he didn't have the time, or maybe he decided not to. I'm not sure why. But why would Chazal hide the real meaning of the Gemara? Meaning, if we believe that they're telling us something very, very deep when they teach us Agadata, then why is it that they wouldn't just tell us what they want to tell us? So the Rambam writes, and the Ramchal writes also similarly in his Maimer on the Haggados, that for 1,500 years the Torah Shebaal Peh was transmitted by word of mouth. And then we started to worry that people's memories weren't what they used to be. We become weaker in our ability to remember things. So they started writing it down, which works okay for halacha, because you can write down what the halacha is. You can write down even the analysis of the halacha. It does not work as well for Agada, because the concepts of Agada are not meant to be understood by everybody, and had only been taught to an elite few up until that point. The dilemma was that if they write it down, it will be distorted by the masses. If they don't write it down, it will be lost. The solution? To write in code and make sure that only those who are worthy of learning should be given the code, the key to decipher the code. So some Agadata is really not meant to contain esoteric wisdom and really could have been conveyed with ordinary language. But even that Chazal sometimes hide in unusual language and write cryptically. Now, why would they do that? The really esoteric stuff, if you ever see the book The Juggler and the King, Rabbi Aaron Feldman, the Rosh Yeshiva in Yisrael, wrote an expansion, I guess, of the Vilna Gaon's commentary to very few certain Agadata Gemaras. So there's some of those Agadatas no one in their right mind would think is meant to be taken literally. There are demons juggling fire over a river or something. Like, what does that mean? We don't know what any of those things mean. But sometimes the Agadata Gemara sounds like it's saying something that's realistic, and yet it's written somewhat cryptically. So why would that be? So there are several reasons that this would be. First of all, Chazal wanted to teach their students that wisdom is best acquired through effort, and this is such an important yesod. A person cannot possibly compare their understanding of Gemara when you just read the translation of something versus when you work through. Sometimes I'm running late for the daf in preparing the daf. I try to prepare the daf in the morning before I give it, and sometimes I wake up late, so I don't have enough time to prepare the daf. So I'll cheat. I'll quickly grab a Mesifta or an art scroll or something, and I find it takes me longer. It takes me longer because I can't focus, because it's supposed to be so easy. My brain isn't on. You need your brain to be activated in order to be able to learn. That's when you're really processing information. If your brain isn't activated, then you're not really learning. A lazy student is not going to follow through on the wisdom of Agadata anyway. So Chazal said, you know what, let's make a small barrier. And therefore, only the people that are determined enough to work through that barrier are going to be able to understand the Agadata and therefore act on that Agadata. Second, there's very often an additional layer or many additional layers of meaning. Some of the interpretations are simple and straightforward enough, but Chazal were teaching us much, much more. And maybe that's why they couched these simple teachings in complicated language. Third, even with the straightforward message, Chazal sometimes are able to add, in Rav Feldman's words, overtones of meaning, which couldn't be expressed by an ordinary statement. Rabbi Feldman gives a beautiful example. The Gemara in Brachos Taf Samach Beis says that a person whose father owns a supply of figs should sell them as soon as the market opens up for them and not wait for his father to sell them. Business advice. You have figs and you have people who want to buy figs. Good, go sell the figs before all the people who wanted to buy figs, already bought them. What is it that there's a new recipe in one of the popular cookbooks that calls for figs, so all the kosher supermarkets have to stock up on figs. So you want to be the person that gets to sell them to all those people. I remember when Susie Fishbane wrote her first cookbook, when I first got married, I never heard of Worcester sauce, but it became like the biggest thing because we needed it for one of the recipes. I remember just seeing a bunch of aimless husbands going through the aisles of the supermarket. What is this stuff? Where do we go? So I remember one. I mean, I'm sure she's a wonderful lady. One husband turned to me as we were late on a Thursday night in the aisles, and he said, "I hate Susie Fishbane." But so they're all everyone. So business advice: sell the figs. Be the first one to sell the figs. Is that really what Chazal are telling us? The Gra explains. The father in this case is a Rebbe. The son is a Talmud. The figs are pieces of Torah. The opening of the market is when people are interested in learning. And the Gemara is saying, if you are a son, meaning you're only a student, you're not yet a Rebbe, and your father is not there, your father's not present and ready to teach, but the market is open, there are people that want to learn Torah, go and teach that Torah. Don't say, I'm not ready to teach the Torah because who am I? How can I teach? I still need a Rebbe to learn Torah from. As the Lebowitz Rebbe Zichron Livracha used to say every year at the Kinner Shluchim, they have this quote: if you know Aleph, go teach Aleph. If you know Beis, go teach Beis. Whatever you know, go and teach it. Don't hold back. Chazal could have just said it in those terms. They could have said, whatever you know, go teach. If you know Aleph, go teach Aleph. But why did they say that there's a fig? And why is Torah all of a sudden a fig? A fig is a mashal to Torah because there are always fresh figs on a fruit tree. There's always something new. There's always a chiddush to learn from a sugya. You go back to a piece of Gemara, you go back to a sugya, you'll always find something new and something fresh. Well, the search for Torah is a marketplace, in the words of Chazal. A marketplace is an exchange. You want to learn Torah, you're going to have to give something up. You give up some of your personal comfort. Sometimes your sleep, sometimes it's a financial sacrifice. We give up. We're moser nefesh in order to be able to learn Torah. A Talmud is a son of a Rebbe is a father. All of this teaches us so much more than if Chazal would have just said, you know what, go teach some more Torah. As Rav Feldman put it, a plain statement exhorting a novice to teach his wisdom to others, even while he needs a teacher himself, could not possibly be laden with such potency of suggestion. And fourth, by using similar metaphors for simple teachings as they do for the more esoteric teachings, Chazal are familiarizing us with the system of how they express themselves. We will then be prepared to decipher more difficult teachings when we're ready for them. And finally, sometimes a simple piece of advice from Chazal is really just that. It's straightforward advice. But since they always teach b'derech kitzara, in an abbreviated fashion, as the Gemara tells us in the beginning of Maseches Pesachim, they try to phrase things in a way that there are additional layers of meaning as well. So in conclusion, when it comes to learning Haggadah, it is very important to have the requisite respect for Chazal. We should utilize the various Svarim on Haggadah and also sensitize ourselves to their different styles, that the way the Maharsha interprets an Haggadah is different than the way that a Ben Yehoyada interprets an Haggadah, and that's different than the way a Vilna Gaon interprets an Haggadah. But Daf Yomi is fast-paced, it's quick, it's one daf after the other, and we often don't have time for the Ben Yehoyadas and for the Gras and to really go into the depths. But we must never have the arrogance to assume that we know what Chazal meant, or chas v'shalom, that we are morally superior. Just as the Daf Yomi Shir doesn't lend itself to an in-depth iyun understanding of a sugya, although if you have a little extra time each day, take advantage of that to learn the daf a little bit better that day. Just because you're not going to be able to do it every day doesn't mean you can't do it any day, and it's something that we should try to become committed to. And if that's true of our learning of the halachic sections of the Gemara, that we know, when we those who studied in yeshiva recognize when we do Daf Yomi, that we're not quite doing it in the kind of depth that we know Gemara can be learned in. If that's true of halacha, it's 1,000 times more true of Haggadah. But the key is we should continue to learn Torah Hashem day in and day out, grow in our knowledge, utilize the All Daf and all of the other beautiful kelim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us to be able to understand His Torah and be able to come closer and closer to the Ribono Shalom. Wish everybody a wonderful day, and I apologize that I have to run out now. But Mazel Tov on the Siyum.
Good morning, everybody. First, I just want to say, in one word, like, wow, how many people are here from Englewood. My parents are here. They came from Florida last night. And my sister and my brother-in-law are here. My sister's big birthday is today. This is how she's celebrating. But my name is Josh Goldberg. I wanted to thank you all for coming today. And, this is really a appreciation and a real happy occasion for the community. And the community of Englewood is a special place. I wanted to introduce right now Rabbi Reichman. And Rabbi Reichman, I was going to say a Siyum on a Dvar Torah on the Siyum. I'm fortunate enough to see Rabbi Reichman a lot over the summers when I'm here. And, on Thursday nights, I used to have must-see TV. Well, on Shabbos afternoon, Rabbi Reichman is must-see Torah. The Dvar Torahs and the Daf Yomis Rabbi Reichman does on Shabbos and Shabbos afternoon are beyond compare. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome him to us this morning.
Thank you all very much for coming, and I want to second all the thank yous that have been mentioned. Thank you to Rabbi Schwed, to the OU, to Aldaf, to Ben Blumenthal for all of your hard work of this morning, and of course to Josh and to the Goldberg family. And may these words of Torah and this Zikui Harabim helping all of us grow in our devotion to Torah and love of Torah. Be a schus li nishmas Yitzchak Isaac alav shalom ben Rav Eliezer sheyichya. So just to end quickly, Maseches Taanis ends by discussing Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av. And the Gemara asks, why is the 15th of Av such a big celebration, a time when all the eligible young ladies would go out and dance in the vineyards, and the eligible young men would come, and thousands and thousands of shidduchim would take place. And the Gemara gives 6 possible suggestions for what's so special about the 15th of Av. It may have been the day when the Sanhedrin decided that tribes could intermarry. It may have been the day when the tribe of Binyamin's ban was removed and people started to marry with members of the tribe of Binyamin after the tragedy of Pilegesh Begiva. It possibly is the day when Yeravim ben Nevat's officers were removed from the roads and people were able to go back up to Yerushalayim. It was the day of the Harugei Beitar, that they were allowed to be buried. Or it's the day of a Siyum. It's the day when we complete the mitzvah of cutting the wood for the Mizbeach, because now the weather is changing. It's not a good time to cut the wood. And I once heard from my Rebbe, Rav Moshe Wolfson, where he asked, if the Gemara gives 6 reasons, it sounds like that's not the real reason. Like if you have a reason, you say the reason. We know the reason for Purim, we know the reason for Hanukkah. But Tu B'Av, there's so much ambiguity. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. None of these dates really are so clear in Tanakh that these dates happened on the 15th of Av. It's sort of like there are all sorts of good things that have happened throughout our Jewish history. Yeravam's guards were removed. Tribes could intermarry. When did it happen? Mesei Midbar stopped dying. Must have been the 15th of Av. But we really don't have great sources for that. So what's perhaps maybe the real reason for the 15th of Av? And we also find that there seems to be a special connection between women and the 15th of Av. The Mishnah mentions Shebehen Benosi Yerushalayim. This is when the daughters of Yerushalayim go out and they go dance in the vineyards. Why is this somehow connected especially to the women? So Rav Wolfson explained that really the source of the 15th of Av, the real celebration of the 15th of Av, is the celebration of the Geula. That we know that Tisha B'Av currently is a time of great sadness, but ultimately Tisha B'Av is going to become a great Yom Tov. It's the time when Mashiach will be born, V'yatza Choter, Migeza Yishai. Tisha B'Av is a time of great celebration, ultimately, when the Geula happens. And Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, is going to be the climax of that celebration. The Torah tells us that through the Atbash, Each day of Pesach is connected to a subsequent holiday. Aleph, the first day of Pesach, is the same day of the week as Taf, as Tisha B'Av. The second day of Pesach, the same day of the week as Shavuos. The third day of Pesach, the same day of the week as Rosh Hashanah. The fourth day of Pesach is the same day of the week as Yom Kippur. And he doesn't give us a date for the seventh day of Pesach, but the seventh day of Pesach is the same day of the week as Tu B'Av. And that's really the climax, just like Shvi Shel Pesach is the climax of Pesach. Tu B'Av is the climax of the celebration of the Geula. We know that on Pesach we eat 3 matzos and we have 4 cups of wine. The 3 matzos correspond to the Avos, and the 4 cups of wine correspond to the Imahos. Wine is a source of emotions, of feelings, and so the women who have the Bina Yisera, the added wisdom, but also a special strength of emotionality, of emotions, they're represented by the 4 cups of wine. V'yayin yisamach levav enosh. Right now we don't have the Geula. We don't have the full redemption. But it's the women, they're the ones who have the feelings, that they can feel the Geula. They're the ones who most appreciate the simcha of Tu B'Av, and that's the real joy of Tu B'Av, the joy of the Geula HaAsida. And so to complete the Masechta Taner Rabbanan, we learned in a Brisa when the women would go out and dance on Tu B'Av, Yaf Yafel Shebehen Mahin Omro Mahayu Omros, the beautiful ones would say, Tznuei Nechem Liyofi, Sheina Isha El Liyofi, Miyuchaso Shebehen Mahayu Omros, those who had a wonderful lineage would say, Tznuei Nechem Lemishpacha, look to family, Lefi Sheina Isha El Lebanim, a mother, a woman is going to be the source of children, of a family. Mechuaro Shebehen Mahayu Omros, those who weren't so beautiful and didn't have such a great lineage, what would they say? Chu Mekchem L'Shem Shamayim, get married for the sake of heaven. Ubelvad Shetatrunu B'Zehuvim, Amar Ula Bira, Amar Belazar, Ula Bira is the name of Belazar. Asar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lasos Machal Tzadikim. Hashem is destined to make a big dancing circle for the Tzadikim. V'hu Yoshev Beineim Began Eden. He's going to sit in their midst in Gan Eden. V'chol Echad Ve'echad Mara Be'etzbo. Each one will point with his finger. Shenamar, as it says, V'amar Bayom Ahu, it'll be said on that day, Hinei Elokeinu Zeh. There's our God. Kivinu Lo V'Yoshienu. We've hoped for him. He saved us. Zeh Hashem. Kivinu Lo. This is Hashem, who we have had our hopes in him. Nagila v'nismacha b'yishuaso, let us be happy and rejoice in his celebration. As Rav Genack mentioned so beautifully, Tu B'Av is a time of Achdus Yisrael, when Hutru Shvatim Level Zebazeh, and it's through Achdus Yisrael that hopefully we'll merit to see the big celebration of Tu B'Av, the Machal of the Tzadikim and the Geula Hasida, b'mehera b'yameinu.
Thank you, Rabbi Reichman. I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Rabbi Akiva Block, and a lot of you know Rabbi Block. For those of you who are online, Rabbi Block is the Rabbi at Kehilas Kesher. The shul actually started with 5 families, and Rabbi Block joined 11 years ago. He was not the founding member, but in his time, it's grown to 250 families. He has over 15 students who are Messiahim Maseches Taanis this morning. Rabbi Block, please give us.
Boker Tov, good morning, everybody. I can't be mosif very much on all the wonderful divrei Torah that have already been shared. I just want to offer a word of hakaras hatov. V'Yehuda shalach lefanav el Yosef lahoros lefanav Goshna. Chazal, in commenting on yesterday's parsha, point out the primacy and the importance, even at the time of the establishment of the very first diaspora Jewish community, that community be a place which is a makom Torah. And for a civilization, for a society in Chutz La'aretz to exist, Torah must be its foundation. And I want to be makir tov, first and foremost, to the members of our Daf Yomi Chabura who have been mechazek me so much each and every day. We've been commenting to each other so much since we learned it a couple of days ago. O chavrusa, o misusa. It's so true how much life and how much chizuk are provided to me, and I know to all of us, with those with whom we study Torah every day. And of course, by extension, my colleagues and my fellow members of the Englewood community, thank you so much for all you do, together with all of us, continuing to grow Englewood as that kind of Makom Torah that we can all be proud of. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless us to continue in that holy work. And of course, to all daf, to Rabbi Schwed, and to the OU, and to everyone involved in creating that virtual Makom Torah. If it's the case that Ves Yehuda Shalach Lefanav El Yosef Laharos Lefanav Goshna in a geographical sense, Bizmanenu Anu, in the times in which we live, the society and the civilization of social media and the internet needs to be a Makom Torah as well. So Kol HaKavod and Yasher Kochachem for all the wonderful work that you do in creating that Makom Torah for all of us and beyond. And my bracha to all of us really is, again, to paraphrase Maseches Taanis, Shekol Netios Shenotim Imcha Yu Kemoscha. May the seeds that we plant here today and every day as we study the daf day after day after day continue to bear fruit, sweet and beautiful and holy fruit. And may our Makom Torah continue to grow and flourish. And may we be the beneficiaries of all that fruit in the days, months, and years to come. Yasher Kochachem. Mazel Tov.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi Block. So first, obviously, I have to thank Rabbi Schwed and the AllDaf. In case some of you aren't familiar, you know, AllDaf is the #1 downloaded app online for any Torah learning whatsoever. There's close to 18,000 downloads a day. Since the inception at the last Siyum Hashas, there's over 3 million hours of learning on the app. Just appreciate that for what the AllDaf and what the OU has done for learning. I just want to end with a short message and then the Hadron. With everyone's permission, I'd like if everyone that is Messiah from the community would come up and do the Hadron with me when I finish. My message today is about the importance of a circle. The circle has been known since the beginning of recorded history. Natural circles observed, such as the moon, the sun, a short plant stalk blowing in the wind of sand, forming a circle shape in the sand. The circle is also the basis of the wheel, which is where modern machinery is possible. In mathematics, the study of a circle has helped impact and inspire the development of geometry, astronomy, and calculus. In fact, most medieval scholars, and many believe, that there's something divine that can be found in circles. In some ways, circles are the way Hashem appears to us in our life. Masechet Taanis ends with a story about a circle. As Rabbi Reichman mentioned, there is a group of tzaddikim, and Hashem is standing in the middle of the circle, and we're all pointing at Hashem, or the tzaddikim are pointing at Hashem. Previous to this Gemara on the Amud, we studied about Tu B'Av. I saw from the Bnei Yissaschar of Tzvi Elimelech that Tu B'Av in this reference is actually 2, the 15th B'Av of the Aleph Beis. The 15th letter of the Aleph Beis is the letter Samech. 15th letter, the letter Samech, another circle. The message of the circles in the last 2 stories of the Gemara. But the most well-known circle in the Masechet belongs to the famous story on Daf Chav Gimel, on Choni HaMagal, Choni the circle maker. What makes a circle so special? Rabbi Akiva Eger says, in the circle, we're all equidistant from the center. Our yearning to be in a circle where we can feel the other people in the circle pulling together to keep the circle together. After Choni's first story, which we talk about how he drew a circle and davened for rain in the community, in the circle, the second story of Choni HaMagal on that page has also a deep connection to our lives today. After falling asleep for 70 years, Choni is searching around to find people that remember him. He starts in his house and his family and says, "Don't you remember me?" They don't remember him. He then goes to the yeshiva. "Am Choni HaMagal." No one seems to remember him. The Gemara ends and says, "Choni chalash date." He weakened and then he passed away. The Gemara ends with the famous line that Rabbi Block mentioned earlier, "I chavrusa, I misusa." Without a chavrusa, there is no life. So the group of guys that I learned with here at Avas Torah, Billy, Gil, Bruce, Dr. Foyer, Yale, Simi, and Asher, have spent a lot of time on this piece of Gemara last Sunday. Many commentators do interpret this pasuk as a need or a plea to have a partner or a chavrusa in learning. Without a chavrusa, there is death. Without you guys, without our chabura, there might not be any life. I'm also fortunate that during the week, my chavrusa, Meir Simcha Kalatsky, is actually here today, and I have to thank him for my commitment to me, my family, and my learning. When two scholars of Torah listen to one another, says the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, Hashem hears their voices. Thank you to the Avas Torah staff group for bringing me in and sharing your circle. The message of Ichavrusa Imisusa is even more emotional to me today, as I've dedicated the Siyum in this cycle on behalf of my brother Elliot, Yitzchak Isaac Ben Eliezer. It's also today I'm dedicating to my aunt Roz Zuckerman, Rasha Bashendel, who passed away last week. Elliot was my first chavrusa, sometimes studying the Parsha, but more often having a machloket in Stratomatic baseball. Elliot and Roz, this Siyum is for you. Others say Ichavrusa Imisusa means without friendship, there is death. Without a friend, a single friend, it's very hard to live. Chavrusa comes from the word meaning friend. Pirkei Avos, obviously, we know it says, Aseh lecharav, uknei lecha chaver, v'haveh et kol adam lekav schus. Without a circle of chaverim, we have nothing. You know, having great friends in Englewood isn't that hard. Some of the guys here from the 9 a.m. Minyan, previously known as the Grumberg Minyan, has welcomed so many guys into their circle. And every single community here within the broader Englewood community has that type of friendship. And they provided so much of life to many of the guys here in Englewood. Without a chevra, without a circle, there is no life. However, the more novel approach of Choni HaMagal was saying that without a chevra, without a community, there is no life. I really can think of no better community to describe this approach than Englewood, New Jersey. For those of you watching online, there's a major renaissance going on here in the town of Englewood in the learning of Torah. There's Nate's Minyan in multiple shuls, a nighttime Torah center where over 60 guys learn every week, and weekly chaburas of hundreds more. And the people here, from the police officers that help with CSS to the coffee guys at Plant Shed, everyone talks about how nice everyone is in the 07631 circle, and they aren't lying. But all of that is inconsequential if Englewood does not have the Rabbanim and the community feel that this town represents. It's the schus of the Rebbeim in the community that want to unite everyone together and build that circle and feel the common bond. This is the greatest high that Englewood and the community have and will continue to become. I am personally lucky that the community has welcomed me and my family so warmly. Thank you, Rabbi Poupko, Rabbi Reichman, Rabbi Block, Rabbi Genack, Rabbi Goldberg, and of course, Rabbi Kasus. Without all of you, we have nothing. Without the chevra, without the circle of rabbis, we have death. We should continue to have the entire Rebbeim here in Englewood holding hands and bringing this community to greater heights. The circle that Hashem sits in the middle is surrounded by our Rebbeim. I'm going to go finish the Gemara now, and I really want to invite everyone up who's being Messiah, if they feel comfortable, to join me with the Hadron, and then we're going to have a Sudas Mitzvah, which I hope everyone could stay and enjoy. I wish everyone a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Leave you alone.
I just want to be on the video.
Yeah, literally this morning as I was walking here.
Go ahead, Josh.
Come on up.
Yeah.
Ben, come on up. Unless you don't want to. You ready? Ready? Hadron alach Maseches Taanis v'Hadron achalan. Data alach Maseches Taanis v'Data achalan. Lo dinashem menach Menachem Taanis lo titash minan. Lo ba'am hadim lo ba'am da'asin. Yirat tzam fanecha nar lein lo vatenu. Shetehei torascha muncha ba'olam hazeh. Tehi imanu l'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Dara bar Papa. Harav now Adonai Leinu et Hebrei Toscha, Fino Fidavkas, Chabez Israel, Bnei Nachman v'Tzetzeinu v'Tzetzeim Chabez Israel, Kulani Yodei Shemecha v'Lamdei Tortecha Lishma, Moavai Techachmenu Misosecha Kidalam Hi Li, Yehi Livi Tamim B'Chukecha Laman Lo Envosh, Leolam Lo Eshkach B'Gudecha Kipam Chitani, Baruch Atah Adonai Lamdeinu Chukecha, Amen, 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 Selah Va'ed. Modim anachnu lach, Adonai lein levotinu. Shesamta chalkeinu miyoshvei medrash. Lo samta chalkeinu miyoshvei karnos. She'anu mashkimim v'hem mashkimim. Anu mashkimim l'divrei Torah v'hem mashkimim l'divrei B'telim. Anu amelim v'hem amelim. Anu amelim v'kabim schar v'hem amelim v'enim v'kabim schar. Anu ratzim v'hem ratzim. Anu ratzim v'chayim alaba, v'hem ratzim l'ver shachas, shenemar, v'yata Elohim toradim l'ver shachas, anshe damim v'mirma, lo yichatzu yimeim, v'ani eftach bach. Yehir atzon l'fanecha, Adonai Elai, kishem shazar tanid l'sayim, Maseches Taanis, ken tazrini l'hatchil, Masechtos usvarim acherim l'saymam. Lil modu l'lamed, lishmor ulasos l'kayim, ekol divrei Talmud Tortecha b'yava, uschus kol atanoim v'amorayim v'talmidei chachamim, yamani uzari, shlo tamush haTorah, mipi zari, v'zera zari ad olam, v'tachem bi, v'hadatzatech tanchei atotach, v'shachbecha tishmor alecha, v'kutzota hi tishichecha, kivi yirbu yimecha, v'yosifu l'cha shnos chayim, orech yomim b'mina, usmola osha v'chavod, Adonai oz le'amo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. This way for Kaddish. Yiskala v'yiskala shmei rabah. V'amad v'rach v'hu de'atid l'achtayechaza, u'de'achaya matmasya, u'de'asaka, ate d'chol alma, u'lehavin karsa di Yerushalayim, u'shachla, hechla, begava, u'lemakar palchana, nechra'a min ara, u'la'asava, palchana di d'shmaya, la'atre, v'yamlich, kedusha brichu, b'malchuse, v'yakare, v'chayechon, v'yamechon, v'chayechon beit Yisrael, Bagala u'vizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabam v'rach le'olam u'lomei al-maya. Yizbarach v'yishtabach v'yizbarah v'yizramah v'yinaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalo shmei l'kudsho b'richu. Le'elam mikol birchata v'shirata. Dushbchata v'nechamata. Damiram v'yama v'imru amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Tamidayon v'al kol Tamidayon v'al kol man da'askim b'araisa. Diba asrei hadei m'chol atar v'atar. Yehei l'hon n'chon n'shom rabba china v'chista v'rachim v'chayim v'richei u'rizor v'vichei u'v'rkan mikan v'ru d'ishmaya v'rab v'yamru amen. Yehei shlamar rabba v'shmayim v'chayim alim v'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav u'yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen.